Convoy to the Supermax, transporting high-risk prisoners to ADX Florence. The Convoy. Before we start, hit subscribe. Because once you hear how the government moves its most dangerous prisoners, you'll never look at a highway convoy the same way again. The road stretched black and slick under a pale Colorado dawn. Snow flurries hung in the air like ash. In the rear-view mirror of an unmarked SUV, a convoy of armored trucks emerged from the darkness, headlights off, engine noise muted by snow. Inside one of those trucks sat a man whose name, to most Americans, meant nothing. To counterterrorism agents, it meant blood spilled overseas and a years-long hunt that had ended only when he was dragged off a plane in handcuffs. Ibrahim Suleiman Adnan Adam Harun had been a ghost for more than a decade, moving between Libya, Nigeria, and Europe under false passports, allegedly smuggling weapons and planning attack. U.S. prosecutors said he had killed 2 American servicemen in Afghanistan and plotted to bomb U.S. diplomatic targets in West Africa. In 2018, after a federal trial in New York, he was sentenced to life in prison. But not just any prison. Harun was bound for the administrative maximum facility in Florence, Colorado ADX, the most secure federal prison in the United States, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, U.S. Department of Justice reports 2018. Most life sentence inmates go to a high-security penitentiary with cells, guards, and routines. Only a few are deemed such a threat, to the public, to staff, or to national security, that they're sent to ADX Florence. There, human contact is minimal and escape is considered impossible. Before a prisoner ever reaches those concrete walls, the transport itself is a classified operation. Schedules aren't published. Routes are changed at the last minute. Vehicles carry no prison logos. Even the officers don't know all the details until the morning of the move. In the pre-dawn cold, special operations teams sealed off the highway's on-ramp. Locals would later swear they heard nothing, no sirens, no helicopters. Yet a moving fortress was rolling past, Bureau of Prisons tactical trucks, U.S. Marshals armored vehicles, and decoy vans. At the center of it, shackled in a restraint system designed for aircraft transport, Harun sat upright, his wrists, ankles, and waist bound, a black hood drawn over his head. According to court filings, he had been designated a high-risk special security inmate, the kind for whom even a courthouse elevator ride requires a full tactical team. The driver of the lead vehicle, a veteran U.S. Marshal named Daniels, name changed for security, had seen cartel lieutenants, mob bosses, and escaped murderers. But the atmosphere that morning was different. Every radio call came in code. The convoy stopped only once, at a shuttered way station, to switch vehicles and throw off surveillance. The marshals had been warned. A single mistake could mean an ambush, an escape attempt, or worse. Behind the tinted glass, Harun's expression remained unreadable. He did not speak. He did not struggle. He had fought extradition for years, claiming to be a combatant, not a criminal. Now his fate was sealed. But for the men transporting him, the mission wasn't over until he was behind the triple-locked doors of ADX. They knew the stories. The rare but catastrophic attacks on transport buses, the violent rescue attempts in Mexico and Europe. Even in the U.S., convoys had been rammed, roads blocked, shots fired. That morning's snowstorm could be cover for anything. As the convoy wound through the mountain pass toward Florence, tension thickened. Radio chatter hinted at a possible surveillance vehicle spotted miles back, unconfirmed. A decoy truck peeled off to lure any tail away. The lead SUV accelerated. Snow spat from its tires. Daniels felt the weight of the prisoner's file in his mind, multiple aliases, global contacts, trained in weapons. One agent had said bluntly, "If this guy ever escapes, he could vanish before sunrise." In a command post miles away, Bureau of Prisons officials monitored GPS dots creeping across a digital map. They would not exhale until the dots stopped moving inside the perimeter fence. Then, just as the prison complex came into view, low concrete buildings ringed by razor wire, watchtowers like chess pieces in the snow, a burst of static filled the convoy's radios. Daniels gripped the wheel. The vehicles slowed. For a second, the entire operation felt like it was unraveling. The marshal's training drilled into them. Any break in communication could signal an impending attack. Through the windshield, Daniels saw the outer gate of ADX swing open. Guard towers loomed overhead. Inside, staff were already on lockdown status. The prisoner intake team, wearing body armor and carrying less than lethal weapons, waited in a sealed sally port. The clock was ticking. Federal guidelines required the handoff to happen in minutes, not hours. The convoy crossed the threshold. The radios crackled back to life. Static gave way to clear voices. It had been only interference from the surrounding mountains. But Daniel's heart kept hammering. Every muscle in his body stayed taut until the armored truck rolled to a stop in the inner yard. The rear doors swung open. Officers moved in, quick and wordless. Harun was guided out, still shackled, his hood removed only after the final metal gate clanged shut behind him. A Bureau of Prisons photographer snapped intake photos under harsh fluorescent light. Within minutes, Harun was assigned a cell in one of ADX's most restrictive ranges, alongside other inmates classified as national security risk. On paper, the operation was a success. Another high-risk prisoner delivered to the nation's most secure prison. But to the men who had driven through the dark that morning, something about the handoff felt unfinished. One of the marshals, checking the convoy log, noticed a discrepancy, a sealed evidence pouch missing from the back of one vehicle. Inside that pouch, according to the manifest, were copies of intercepted communications that had helped convict Harun. Without those papers, parts of the case file were incomplete. He glanced at Daniels. "Do you have it?" Daniels shook his head slowly. "No. It was on the second truck." The second truck's driver swore he had never seen it. Yet the security cameras showed it being loaded before departure. And now, somewhere between New York and Colorado, a piece of evidence had vanished. The prisoner was locked away. But someone, somewhere, had taken something the government hadn't meant to lose. And the story of the convoy to the Supermax was about to get much darker. The missing file. Snow was still falling over Florence when the convoy dispersed, but inside ADX the intake process moved like clockwork. Harun was strip-searched, photographed, and issued a khaki jumpsuit. His restraints were removed one by one under the eyes of 3 correctional officers and a lieutenant with a clipboard. He was led down a corridor lined with sound-dampening panels into the special security unit, where cell doors are heavy steel with interior food slots and cameras embedded in the ceilings. Once the final door closed, the world outside the cell dissolved to silence. For the marshals, however, the mission wasn't over. In a windowless debrief room just off the sally port, Daniels spread the paperwork on a metal table. The sealed pouch containing the intercepted communications, hundreds of pages of transcripts and coded notes, should have been there. It wasn't. The log sheets showed it loaded onto the second truck in New Jersey. The second truck's crew swore under oath they'd never touched it. Somewhere on the 1,000-mile route, the evidence had disappeared. By federal protocol, loss of classified material during prisoner transport triggers an immediate joint investigation. Within hours, the U.S. Marshals Service, Bureau of Prisons, and FBI Denver field office were in a secure conference call. The missing packet contained details of Harun's overseas contacts, information still relevant to ongoing counterterrorism cases, DOJ case filings, 2018. If it had fallen into the wrong hands, it could expose informants or compromise operations abroad. Daniels sat in the briefing room listening as an FBI agent outlined the stake. "This isn't a lost lunch bag," she said. "Those comms were never meant to leave us CNF. We need to know if this was theft, negligence, or something worse." Agents fanned out along the convoy's route. Gas station cameras were pulled. Way station logs were subpoenaed. The manhunt. Snowmelt had turned the foothills outside Colorado Springs into a gray slush when the FBI's tactical teams arrived. Streets were cordoned off, agents in body armor combing alleys, satellite trucks parked discreetly 2 blocks away. The missing contractor, his name now on a sealed indictment, had vanished as if swallowed by the earth. His phone went dark hours after the convoy reached ADX. What little digital trace he left behind was encrypted chatter with an unknown overseas contact. Inside the Denver field office, a war room had been set up. Satellite images flickered across screens. Analysts scrolled through forum posts matching phrases from the stolen transcripts. Each post had a timestamp, building a pattern like breadcrumbs. If the data in that pouch was feeding into live networks, someone was orchestrating it with precision. Daniels stood at the back of the room, a coffee cooling in his hand. He wasn't an FBI agent. He was a marshal who'd done his job, delivered a prisoner. But he felt the weight of the missing evidence like a personal failure. He'd been the convoy lead. He'd signed the chain of custody forms. And now the case that had once been sealed tight in a New York courtroom was bleeding out into the wild. By the third day, a lead surfaced. A security camera at a truck stop 150 miles south had caught the contractor's SUV pulling into a back lot and meeting a second vehicle, a battered white panel van with no plate. The driver of that van remained unidentified, face obscured by a scarf. But a glimpse of a tattoo on his hand, a serpent winding around a dagger, sent a ripple through the analysts. It matched a mark seen on one of Harun's known associates from West Africa, a man believed to have slipped into the U.S. years ago under an alias Unconfirmed Intelligence, DHS Memo 2016. This wasn't random. Someone had reached into the heart of a federal prisoner transport and plucked out a file that should never have existed outside a secure vault. Meanwhile, inside ADX Florence, Harun's daily routine continued. 23 hours in a cell, 1 hour in a caged recreation pen, meals slid through a slot. But guards noticed subtle changes. He ate faster. He spent longer at the slit window. Once, during a medical check, he asked a nurse if the delivery had arrived. She filed an incident report, but by the time it reached investigators, the nurse had been reassigned and couldn't remember his exact wording. The public knew nothing. Official press releases still spoke of a successful high-security inmate transfer. But on the dark corners of the internet, countdown clocks began appearing on forums tied to extremist propaganda, using the same code words as the stolen transcripts. The FBI's counterterrorism chief flew in from Washington. In a closed-door briefing, she laid out the stakes. If these documents reveal our informants or planned operations overseas, people will die. And if they're used to plan an attack here, it's on us. They didn't have the contractor. They didn't have the van. All they had was the feeling of a fuse burning unseen. That night, Daniels drove alone out past the prison fences. In the distance, ADX sat like a concrete citadel under floodlights, its towers cutting the night sky. He had delivered Harun. But the missing file, and whoever had taken it, had turned his mission into something else entirely. He thought of the decoy trucks, the rest stops, the static on the radio just before they arrived. Could it all have been orchestrated? Had the convoy been mapped weeks in advance, an inside job feeding coordinates to waiting hands? The next morning, the FBI got a break. A rancher east of Pueblo called in a trespasser hiding in a barn. Agents moved in. They found the contractor crouched behind hay bales, clothes muddy, eyes bloodshot. In his backpack was a burner phone, a wad of cash, and a sealed pouch wrapped in plastic. He surrendered without a word. But when the evidence pouch was opened under sterile lights back at the field office, it was empty. The documents were gone. Only one thing remained inside, a single page torn from the transcripts with 3 words scrawled across it in red ink. "They are coming. The Citadel." The contractor sat shackled in an interview room at the Denver field office, eyes hollow, hands trembling. Agents tried everything: threats, pleas, promises of leniency. He said nothing. He just stared at the one-way glass as though he could see through it. On the table lay the single page they'd recovered, the red ink still wet. Digital forensics confirmed what everyone feared. Within hours of the convoy arriving at ADX, encrypted packets matching the stolen documents had been uploaded to an offshore server and then disappeared through a series of relays. Whoever orchestrated the theft had received the information, destroyed the originals, and left the contractor behind as a decoy. Inside ADX, Harun followed his routine, but staff noticed an edge. He paced his cell, lips moving silently. Twice he refused meals. On the 3rd day, a guard sliding his tray through the slot heard him whisper, "It's begun." In Washington, the counterterrorism chief convened a midnight briefing. Analysts had decrypted fragments of the forum post. The language suggested not an attack but an exposure, a leak designed to burn informants and disrupt U.S. operations abroad. Names and locations embedded in the stolen transcripts matched assets working under deep cover. One by one, those assets were being pulled, operations aborted. A decade of intelligence work was collapsing in real time. Daniels watched it unfold from the periphery. He'd done everything by the book, yet the theft had happened under his nose. The weight of it gnawed at him. On impulse, he requested a visit to ADX under the pretext of a procedural interview. In a sterile room separated by bulletproof glass, he sat across from Harun for the first time since the transport. The inmate's eyes were calm, almost amused. "You delivered me," Harun said quietly. "And you delivered my message." Daniel's stomach turned. What message? But Harun only smiled, tapping 2 fingers on the glass in a slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Daniels realized it was the same pattern he'd seen on the forum posts: 3 beats, a pause, 3 beat. Security officers moved Daniels out quickly. In the corridor, a supervisor told him Harun had been placed on complete communication blackout. But the damage was already done. The leak had spread beyond recovery. Weeks passed. The story never made national headlines. The public heard only a bland press release about a breach of protocol during a routine inmate transfer. The contractor disappeared into a sealed federal case. Inside the intelligence community, careers ended, programs were shut down. Daniels resigned quietly, his badge turned in without ceremony. On his last drive past the prison, floodlights cut the night into white bars. Beyond the razor wire, the towers of ADX rose like a fortress built to contain secrets, but sometimes, he thought, the most dangerous secrets weren't inside the cells at all. Back in his car, he checked his phone. An anonymous message had arrived seconds earlier: "Convoys move both ways." There was no signature. Only the same 3-beat pattern at the end. Tap, tap, tap. Daniels sat there for a long time, the glow of the screen fading. The nation's most secure prison loomed behind him. Somewhere beyond the Rockies, a network they'd never fully mapped was already moving on to its next play. And the man who had once been a ghost, now locked in a concrete box, had managed to reach out and touch the world anyway. The convoy to the Supermax had ended. But the story it carried was only beginning.
Thanks for watching.